So over on Instagram, a lot of people have sent me messages showing interest that they want to get into water production, they want to set up their own water production factory. I have some of these questions here, and I'll be answering one of them in particular today, which is locating your factory. Some people have asked me this question: if I want to locate my factory, like what kind of land size do I need? How big does the land needs to be? Someone has told me that they have a one-bedroom apartment. Someone have told me that they have an old apartment complex that they would like to use. So many questions like that. So today what I'll just want to advise and say you should put in mind while watching this video is, if you have a space or you already have a land that you want to use, I'll be listing out some things that you need to put in mind, that you need to create specific space for these things. You need to create space for some of these things I'll be mentioning here, for all of them, not even some, for all of them, all of the things I'll be mentioning today. Just put in mind that you need to create space for them. So if you have a land, as I'm mentioning them, you can just picture like creating space for each of the things. Then at the end of the video, you will know if your space will be enough or not. And if you don't have a land already, but you're thinking of buying like some place for you to use to set up your own factory, as I'm mentioning these things, you can also, think of the kind of size that will fit some of these things for you. Because depending on your scale of production, you might need a much bigger space, and maybe someone that's just thinking of producing only pure water might need a smaller space. So just listen carefully as I'm mentioning these things, then I think it will help you make your decision while thinking of a space to set up your own factory. So the first thing you need to consider is your changing room and your washing room. And you also need to, put in mind that this changing room and washroom, you need to create a site for your male staff and a site for your female staff. All the things I've mentioned here are part of NAFDAC requirement. NAFDAC is the National Agency for Food and Drugs Administration control in Nigeria. So they'll actually come to inspect some of the things before you begin production in the factory. So just know that this is a requirement, except maybe you want to go and start a backyard factory. But if you are going through the front door and following all procedures, you need to create a washroom for male and female staffs. So the next thing you need to consider while creating a space for your factory is your raw material storage room. So your raw material storage room is very important because this is the space where you house your raw materials. Let's say you're into pure water production, you need somewhere to keep your rolls, you need somewhere to keep your packing bags and every other thing again that you need for production. So a raw material room is very important, especially if you are also going to bottled water, because you need a place to keep your preforms, you need a place to, keep some of all these things necessary for production. And in Nigeria, if you are producing in Nigeria, it is advisable that you buy some of these raw materials in bulk. Price is constantly increasing and inflation, you know how the market is. So it is advisable for you to create at least a huge, when I say huge, I mean for people producing bottled and pure water, maybe dispenser, you need a huge space. But I think you can just, work on something that can accommodate all these raw materials, that you can house them properly. So keep in mind that you need a space and a separate room for your raw materials. And it's also good so that you can at least be accountable. By the time you have a separate room for your raw materials, you know that you can lock them, keep them properly. They are away from any other thing that might damage them. So having a separate raw material room is very important. So the next thing you need to consider is your blowing room. So your blowing room is the room or the section of the factory where you produce your bottles for bottled water production. So if you are going to bottled water production, you need a separate blowing room, because your blowing room, the machine for the blowing room is a heavy machine. It has a compressor that needs to be kept outside, and the noise the machine produces, it needs to be isolated and kept in a separate area from where other activities are going on in the factory. So when creating your own factory, you need to consider creating a separate space for your blowing room. I've seen people use their blowing room outdoors, but I think it's advisable for you to have a room, like to house it indoor, because you keeping it outdoors, maybe water or maybe something might just come and affect it. which you wouldn't want. Repairing these machines are not cheap, they're expensive. So it is advisable for you to have a separate room for your blowing. And if there's a separate room for your blowing, you can easily keep your PET bottles by the side. You can easily, your blown bottles, you can properly keep them. But having them outdoors like that, they can easily get contaminated. And it's something that you also put something inside again. You fill it with water or maybe juice or something. So you need to keep them separately and have their own separate room. The next space you will need to consider is your main factory hall. So your main factory hall is like the main factory area. When you go into a factory, you'll see, yes, this is a factory. So this is the place where all activities are going on. This is the hall where you have your pure water machine one side, maybe you have your bottled water filling machine another side. Then you have your pipes running through the whole facility, and this is the main space where your general factory activities are happening. So put in mind that when creating a space for a factory, aside from the blowing room, the storage room, you also need to have your main factory hall. I think this is very important. And sure, when people think of factory, I think this is the main space that they are always talking of, the main factory hall space. But yeah, this is just a part of having a factory because you need to create spaces for other things. Inside this main factory hall, there is a requirement by NAFTA. So to say if you don't have a separate room for pure water filling, because I've seen people done it that way. They have a separate room for pure water, they have a separate room for bottled water. But if you are using the factory hall, which you produce your pure water and your bottled water at the same place, NAFDAC requires that you create a separation or a demarcation, so that the products of pure water production won't come into the bottled water side and vice versa. So yeah, you also need to keep in mind that inside your factory hall, your space there, you need to create demarcations for each section of production. One more thing you need to consider is a space for your water treatment setup, your water treatment plant. So all the machines needed for treating your water, that's your reverse osmosis, your carbon and sand water filters, all those equipments you will need to provide a space for them. It could be inside the factory, it could be outside the factory. I think we've tried both ways in our previous factory, which I'll be creating a video on why we relocated to our new factory location. In our previous factory, we had the water treatment machines, the equipment inside the factory. But in our new factory location, now we have them outside the factory. We created a space, a shed for the machines to be kept in those areas. So it is also one thing that you need to consider when thinking about the space and size of your factory. Think of your water treatment equipment. So one more thing again you need to consider, which I think this one by default it should come with thinking about where to locate your factory, is where to park your delivery vehicles. The next thing you will need to consider, and the next space you need to create, is your space for finished products. So your finished product room is the room where you keep your pure water, your bottled water. After you finish all production, before distributing them to the market. This is the place where, like the way it's done in our own factory, the finished product room is almost like an exit of the factory because this is where the delivery vehicle will come, then they'll load the pure water and the bottled water into the delivery vehicles before it is taken to the market. So creating a finished product room is very important, and it might be very big, it might be small, depending on your scale of production. Some people like to create in bulk. Like I know we've done it too in our own factory, especially during the dry seasons when there's water scarcity and there's high demand for water. So we create or we produce pure water in large quantity. Sometimes we can produce up to 1,000 bags, more than self. We've produced them in such large quantity before, and we've housed them in that storage room. And sometimes when you even keep them, it doesn't even take up to 2 to 3 days. You've sold everything. So you need to put in mind that your storage room is important if you don't want to keep on producing every day. If you want to like have periods of breaks, which I think is also important because sometimes like public holiday might come up, and it's not all your staff that want to work on public holidays. It's not everybody that would like to come and work for you in the night or on odd hours. So you need to have a huge storage room so that by the time you produce during the day in large quantity, you can store them and distribute them, to your customers at a later time. So the next thing you need to consider, the next space you need to consider is your admin office and your account office. So this could either be the same office or you could create them separately. Like if you want clarity, if you don't want anything mixing with your money, you can create a separate account room. But I think it's just also fair. You can create, like, you can merge them together, your admin office and your account office. You can have them all in one. So this is the space where all administrative functions, all marketing strategies, all calculations, this is the space where all those things are carried out. And it has to be separate from where all the noise and the production is going on in the factory. So you need a separate space for your accounting and your administrative function. So keep in mind when creating your own factory, you need the space for these things. Like that space is where you hold meetings with your staffs. It is where, if there's any, how many bags are left, how many did you sell, how many, water did we give out to people. This is where all those calculations and all those meetings will hold. So you need to create a separate space for your accounting and administrative functions. The last thing you need, the last thing you need to keep in mind when creating your own factory space is to create a space for your generator, maybe your, let me just call it your housing unit, your power housing unit. So you need to create a space for a power source. Now this space is where you keep your generators. If you have an inverter, you also need to keep your batteries there, your breakers, everything that has to do with electrical work. This is the space where you will keep all those things so that you won't have any, fire or any incident or accident happening in the factory. Having a separate room for all this electrical equipment is important. You don't know when you might need a generator. We've used generator multiple times in our factory. So you don't know when you will need all these things. And you need a space where you can keep them, even your tools. All these things are, are things that you will need in the factory. So you might have a raw material storage room, but those ones are specifically for what you produce in the factory. Now, this other room you will need, this space you are creating, is for electrical tools, your mechanical tools, and all those things that you will need to ensure smooth running of your factory, where you keep your fuel and the rest. So I'm sure if you follow all these things, if you think of them, if you've written them down in your own book before setting up your own factory, at least you won't have a space that is too small or you won't have a space that is too big. Although I think having a space that is too big is good. It's a plus to your factory. So I'm sure by the time you go through all this list, you'll be able to make the right decision before setting up your own factory, depending on your scale of production. Thank you all for watching this video. And I'm working on a course for helping people get into factory production. Maybe if you're thinking of going to pure water production or bottled water production, I'm working on a course that will put you through step by step on all the things you will need to consider. I will even have some experts that will come on and also share their own input. So you can sign up for that course using the link in the description. And yeah, I'll be sure to meet you guys there. Till the next video, don't forget to subscribe, share the video. And I'm sure there are so many people out there who will need this information before setting up their own factory. So you can share the video and yeah.